Thousands of students are beginning to take the ISTEP this week, but getting to this point has been a difficult journey. Recurring problems with technology and last-minute legislative changes to trim the length of the test have only added to the frustrations many Hoosier parents feel about the stressful effects of standardized testing. Many parents are deciding to opt out or withdraw their child from this year's pool of test takers. But as State Impact Indiana's Rachel Morello reports, that decision could have serious repercussions for teachers, schools, and even the state.
He just enjoys being a kid, playing outside, playing basketball.
Caswell Woodruff is a fourth grader at Bloomfield Elementary School. Last year, as he prepared to take his first ISTEP, he began relaying horror stories about the test to his mother, Risa.
He would tell me some of the things that the teachers would say about, you have to pass this. And he would just tell me some of the kids were worried and concerned and just the stresses of the environment in the classroom because of the testing.
Worried for her son, Woodruff began researching, finding any information she could about Indiana's standardized tests. And what she found scared her, too.
The more research we did on the subject, the more we wanted to opt our child out of the test. They're not a reliable and accurate assessment of our child's developmental growth.
Woodruff opted her son out. All it took was a letter to the principal, followed by a meeting to discuss activities he would do during the testing period. She plans to do the same thing again this year. Interest in opting out of the exam is growing. A Facebook page in support of opting out of the spring ISTEP test tripled in followers this month. Likes increased by 20% in the last week alone. And it's easy to understand why, with recent technology issues, flare-up over the length of this year's assessment, and more drama among top government officials in taking action to trim the test. But Indianapolis parent Marianne Schlegel-Ruger wants parents to know what they're getting themselves into if they make the decision to opt out. She knows from experience.
With the system that we've set up, anything that affects the test scores or the test participation affects the schools, affects the teachers, affects the communities that the schools are in, and it affects the children.
There's no law on the books in Indiana about opting out. The Department of Education lets each district decide how to handle it. But there are consequences if enough students don't participate.
It can have a very big impact on state accountability, which means a school's A through F grade. So if students don't have, or schools don't have 95% of their students taking the assessment, that can knock their letter grade and knock their grade down an entire letter, or potentially even more depending on the circumstance.
95% is the magic number for federal requirements too. No Child Left Behind requires 95% participation, or Indiana could see a serious reduction in federal funding. Don't forget, test scores factor into things such as teacher evaluations and teacher pay as well.
As I'm sure you can imagine, at some of the smaller schools, even if you're just talking about a couple of children that end up not taking the assessment, that can have a really significant impact, not just on the school, but on the community.
Marianne Schlegel-Ruger's daughter no longer attends the school where she opted out in 2012. It closed in 2013. The public reason? Poor test scores. Ruger says the scores for every child who opted out, including her daughter, were reported as failing.
I have regretted it for the sake of the school because the closing was very sudden. It was very disruptive for our family. It was probably the biggest crises we've ever had.
Despite her family's experience, Ruger says she is neither a proponent nor an opponent for opting out. Instead, she emphasizes the need for parents to voice their concerns about testing where they can best be heard.
Whenever I made that decision for my daughter, I didn't fully know maybe what other options I might have had, which would not have taken care of the test that year for her, or maybe the next, but would have made a difference for the future. I could have instead gotten in my car and driven to this building, and I could have gone and met with senators and representatives and their staff and told them what problems were out there and what we were thinking about perhaps, and how I thought they needed to vote to change that.
As schools begin to administer the ISTEP this week, most Hoosiers will take a collective sigh of relief because the test will take fewer hours to complete than the DOE previously announced. But for teachers and administrators, opt-out may mean test stress is just beginning to build.
The Department of Education will be able to track the number of students opting out at each school once finalized tests are collected. Then when the tests are graded, that data will become one of the factors that comes into play in calculating this year's A through F school grades.